All right, so we're working our way through domain 5 of our exercise technique today. I did find a new bit, by the way. I found a new channel on YouTube. I did want to show one of their videos for. I'm going to keep it relatively brief as I show it today, just because it's a little slow. It's somebody kind of moving in video form at the pace that I kind of move of, which I know is a little bit slower than some of our more interesting videos. But it's just a really good resource. It's another company that does NASM exam prep. He actually does it. It's an older gentleman, like with a book, and he kind of goes through the chapter, which is cool. You know, it's a good exam book, but I want to show that at one point just so that we get a little bit familiar with it. And that way you guys can look that up if you want to before your exam date. Some of those other teams out there do really good work. And now I want to go through all of these chapters one more time, just in a slightly different way than we did last time. Last time we did it in the OPT version. Today I want to go through it in the big chart version, which is helpful in its own way. And then, yeah, we'll keep working on it. We're going to knock out every one of these bullet points like we've been doing. So yeah, so talking about like our tasks, which are not necessarily bullet points. These are just things that they, again, don't forget, like the way the blueprint works, guys, like these first, the tasks section is not like bullet point questions to master, right? Like these are basically just like, I don't know, the overall mission, the feel that NASM wants you to have, the more subjective, like, what is covered, you should be an expert on this, to do this job section here. Then the bullet points are, where you're going to get test questions from directly. So our tasks, we want to understand like instruction and demonstrate proper technique for your clients, right? So we'll talk about like what a good angle looks like. So just briefly introing that, let's talk about like a proper squat, right? Versus, we'll say, an anterior pelvic tilt squat, right? See if that Google image comes up the way I want it to. So if we see a client who has, actually, there we go. We can see there's butt wink. This is actually the opposite of an anterior pelvic tilt. So that's not what it is, but still an alteration. So you can see here, right? Like she's got, this does have like some curvature here, but she's still in a very neutral spine. This version here, she's excessively leaning forward. This version here, we've got the actual like posterior pelvic rotation. You can tell, even just like looking at the hem of the shorts, like this is tucking underneath here, right? It's a little bit easier to tell just by simply looking at the rounding, particularly like right at the tailbone there. You can see that. But again, like what we don't have is like a neutral spine, right? So she can keep her head up. That's going to help her with that a little bit. How do we tell if something is, butt winking like this? Again, we can see the rounding there versus the neutral spine there. But most of the, other reasons why this is good, you kind of take a look at it. I kind of copy this image here. Let me take a look. I'm going to paste this here. We look at these lines. The reason we like this version so much is if I draw an imaginary line from like his ankle traveling up his shin, and here, those lines are parallel. That's exactly what we want. We want nice parallel lines, right? What we see here is like this is actually pretty good for a good chunk of the section, right? Like you can see it's starting to lean forward a little bit more than he was over here. But then like there's this kind of kink down here, right? So you consider that line. Those are definitely going to intersect, right? Now we take a look at, let's say like an excessive forward lean. See that version. We're going to see kind of the same problem, right? So we put this version here. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see that better. Again, he's dumping his chest forward, shins coming up. Those lines are going to intersect here, right? If we have an excessive low back arch, in our squat, that's so funny. This keeps coming up. looking for arch, not rounding. um, so we'll see here. Copy that image, and we come over here. She's going to be a lot smaller. Yeah. That is a tiny image. So our quality issues here. So again, a section of this is okay, right? Like a good, I mean, like, again, a little leany, right? But again, like now we're having, instead of rounding back like this, we're rounding out like this, right? And so now you can see this line and this line are going to interact. Now, do you really need to like draw every one of those lines in your head? Not really. You can see the arching like that. You can see in the butt wink, the rounding like that, right? And then the excessive lean, like they actually might have a really good flat low back. They actually could be in a pretty good spot there, but that is where you'll look for those lines to intersect. So, okay, so we look at our main problems. Let's go to sort of our fitness assessment here, right? NASM has the overhead squat solutions table, right? It's available for download off their website. Now, I will say this is the one from the corrective exercise textbook. So there's a few extra muscles in here and a few extra problems in here. But we're going to talk about like the idea of like coaching these things properly today. We're going to be able to spot these things and what they look like. Right, this is a pretty good place to start. So let's get that open so we can have it and head over to nasm.org here. Get signed in and log in and run over to here. We are going to stay, we're in CPT7 here, so I'm not going into corrective on the website. I'm just going to go regular here. Let that load. And let's head over to the assessment chapter, actually. We'll go to our posture section. And we'll talk about the observing dynamic posture. This actually, I think it's in here on the website. Yeah, there we go. So, okay. So we're gonna work our way through kind of understanding these. Now, here's the thing. Really quickly, one thing I want to address before we get too far into this. I am looking at the overhead. Yeah, we're talking about the overhead squat today, but okay, so let's, Trisha, just because I see your mic is undone, so I'm gonna pick on you a little bit.
Okay.
If you saw a client with an excessive low back arch, give me one tight muscle that they might have. They've got an excessive low back arch. What's one muscle that could be tight?
There are flexors in the front, so there's psoas.
Yep, hip flexors on the front. Really good during a squat. Yep, now it makes a lot of sense. You're probably going to see that, right? Now, if we go a little further, what's another one that could possibly be tight? You got any more? Let's go into the core in particular. I got it sneaking up here, actually.
Andrew, read this and you will see the answer. Well, see, it does say hip flexors. Okay, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, no, you're correct. You're correct. I'm just going to kind of keep
So
working.
well, you said core. So your extensors, well, that's not core. I'm reading the
That's still part of
sign.
your core. Remember, it's not part of your abs, but it is part of your core.
Okay, yeah. So your extensors and your lats.
Yeah, so your lumbar extensors could be really tight, and that's causing your low back arch during the squat. Now, here's where I'm not trying to trick you, but we don't talk about it as often, so it might feel tricky. What if they were excessively arching their back during, let's say, a chest press? They're doing dumbbells, right? They're on a, or let's say they're on a chest press machine, right? So they're on a chest press machine, right? And you just notice there's like this huge gap. What muscle do you think is really tight during that?
They're pushing up and their back is arching.
Mm-hmm. What do we expect?
I'm not sure.
So here's the thing. The lumbar extensors.
It's still okay.
Same
Okay.
answer. Now we use the overhead squat not because
Here, I'm trying to think of something different. That's why I was
no, you are. Yeah.
right.
That's the trap, right? That's the trap when you're taking tests sometimes. You're like, it's gotta be this because of variety, right? Nope. The muscles that cause arching are the same muscles that cause arching during a squat as they are during a row, as they are doing a bench press, as they
So
are.
arching is arching is arching no matter
Yeah.
what.
So why do we
Okay.
always talk about the squat so often? We just like the squat because it stresses the whole body. It's a really good way for us to do one movement and learn almost everything we need to know. Not quite everything
Okay.
we need to know. It's not so good for the traps and stuff, for the neck.
Right. But
But
just
like
an overall body assessment can
exactly.
be determined. Okay.
So arching is arching is arching. Rounding is rounding is rounding. Knees caving in is knees caving in is knees caving in. You know what I mean? So
Same
like,
things cause it. Right, right. That only makes sense.
yeah, I mean, and it does. That's what's so funny. It makes a ton of sense when you take a second and you go, oh yeah, like of course. Like when you're taking a test, it feels like you're like, oh, it's got to be a thing, right? So I'm doing
Yes.
bicep curls and my knees, I'm sitting there. Actually, let's see if I can do that. Let's see if I can. I'll bet I can find it. Seated bicep curl. Let's look online and see if I can find somebody doing this because you'll see people get lazy sometimes. Um, no. Whoop, maybe a little. No, that's okay actually. Um, Actually, I see a lot of people cave out because there's usually a bar here. Um, no, not seeing it so much. I thought I might. What I was expecting to see is like somebody like knock kneed. You know what I mean? Like somebody's like, whoop, whoop, whoop. No, that's fine. There we go. That's kind of not quite it. But like, like their knees coming in and then like their feet just kind of splayed out. So they get this like pigeon toed posture, right? And it's like, if that's the form they're going to, is that affecting their bicep curls at all? No, that's having no effect on their bicep curls. Like, not really. But it is 100% an example of like, why is that your neutral posture? Actually, there we go. See, her feet are a little bit, see, our knees are touching, but her feet are actually kind of spread a little bit at the bottom. So she's got that kind of knock-kneed posture, right? Boop, boop. Now, if she were squatting right now, we would definitely be like, oh, that's a knees caving in, right? So if I'm coaching this client, I don't first of all, I don't even do seated bicep curls. If you're going to do arm work with me, you're definitely either standing on one leg or you're at the cable machine. But let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm doing an exercise that I never give. I'm doing seated bicep curls, right? And I see my client like caving their knees in like this. Now, if I tell them, hey, do me a favor, spread your knees out and get your knees tracking over your toes, like get your heel, get your ankle and your foot and your heel up under the rest of your leg, please. And they ask me, oh, was I doing it wrong? It's like, well, you're not doing the bicep curl wrong. Because really the only thing I'm caring about is like elbow flexion here. You did your elbow flexion correctly. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking about, and Aaron, just to fill you in, catch you up real quick. We are in exercise technique and training instruction today. So if I'm talking about, their bicep curl part of the lift, no, it's not wrong, not necessarily, you know. However, if I'm talking about like their life posture and habits, I would love for them to start just keep thinking about like keeping those knees tracked over the second and third toe. Everybody should do the appropriate amount of man spreading when it comes to like your standing or seated posture. Your knees should track over your second and third toe. I know it's polite to get collapsed in and try to take up as little space as possible, but honestly, we want to make sure we're in that correct alignment. This guy here, actually is a different problem, but like I look at him and I'm like, the knees tracking straight down, but his foot's super turning out. That's a big foot turnout. I would expect this hip joint to probably come out more at an angle like this and down rather than like, it's coming out a little bit, but his feet are coming out a lot. So I'd be like, ooh, maybe he has tight calf muscles. Does that have anything to do with my bicep curl? No. So if I've got a new client and I'm trying to fix this problem in their lifestyle, I might bring it up once they master their bicep curl. If they're new to a bicep curl, I'll probably just let it slide. I'll probably be like, just focus on doing the proper elbow flexion right now. And then luckily a bicep curl is a pretty easy exercise.
Yeah,
But
like it doesn't take much to master one for most people, right?
yeah, right. So what I'll do is I'll probably be like, they'll be like, am I doing this right? And if I see the feet turning out, my brain goes, yeah, feet could be better. But like right now, I care about the bicep curl. I'm like, yeah, looks great, And then worked with them a couple times. Every bicep curl set starts to look really good. They're not arching, not swinging, or doing any of that nonsense stuff. You will see, although you usually see that during a standing bicep curl. They'll do this. um, but they're doing the seated version, and now it's like, hey, do me a favor, point those toes forward, or push those knees out a little bit. And now I can start caring about these things that are a little bit more like related to their posture, right? So what I want to go over today is, again, kind of going back to our assessments chapter and getting really familiar with, if you see a client whose feet are turning out, our probable tight muscles are the gastrocnemius and the soleus and the hamstring complex here. Now, I actually don't love that they boiled this down in this edition of the textbook. They made this a little simpler, which is nice because it's easier to memorize, but it's harder to memorize because it makes a little bit less sense. It's not just tight calves in general that turn the feet out. It's particularly like the lateral aspect of those calves, right? Because that's the part that does the external rotation, right? In the hamstring, it's not just the hamstrings in general. It's really more like the biceps femoris, the short head in particular, right? Like that little shorty hamstring muscle that starts in the middle of the femur and then runs to the outside part of the knee. That's really the big culprit here. So I wish they were a little bit more specific with stuff like that, but fortunately not. So you see a client doing this, right? During their squats, you know what's tight. And you know what's not firing properly. They're gluteus maximus and gluteus medius. So when it comes to exercise technique and training instruction, right? Lisa, I'll pick on you for a second. I know their feet are turning out and their knees are still going straight forward. I want to get them drawn into the correct alignment. What is a muscle that I could say, hey, do me a favor, try to fire this a little bit better, right? By doing what? What would I tell them to get them to fix their alignment?
To fix their alignment with their feet or their knees?
Their feet are turning out, which means their knees are caving in naturally, right? Like these are not in alignment. So what can I say? What's a sentence that you would use to get somebody to activate? What's something that instantly activates, particularly your gluteus maximus and medius?
I would tell them to push their knees out.
Yeah.
Drive their knees out.
Perfect. Right? You'd say like, hey, do me a favor, push those knees away. Right? Now, what they'll often do, oh man, I cannot tell you how often this happens. Here, I'm actually going to turn my camera down for this. You'll say something like, I forgot this was here. You'll say something like, hey, do me a favor, push your knees out. And they'll go like this. And it's like, that is not pushing your knees out. That is leaving your knees the same, but stepping out. So sometimes you also have to do me a favor, push and I'll point, like push your knees out, and that'll get them into that correct alignment sometimes. But like that is a thing that happens a lot. Like people will, sometimes you'll say it and you'll say it in a way that's like, to you very clear, and your client will do something. Then you got to go back and say, okay, hold on, reset, go back to where you were. Don't move your feet out, push your knees out,
But do you find you know exactly what client you have to word it perfectly for? You know what I mean?
I do, and
I
don't.
have a client, I know that I have to be very specific for this one particular client when I'm giving him instructions to work with me in stretching or anything, because he is so literal. And he would be the one that would step his leg out. If I left anything open, he will, and I just know that automatically.
Oh yeah, I mean, sometimes it's amazing how clients can misinterpret things. I'm like, how did you come up with that interpretation? Like sometimes.
Yeah.
But you asked,
Anyway.
how do I find that I get but not with everybody immediately. That's like it's definitely like a language thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And everybody communicates just a little bit differently. I mean, look at you and I, like recently, right? There was like a day, what was like a week ago, and it was like class or course, and I'm like, course, right?
Right.
Sometimes that's really clear. Other times not so much. That's totally just like a thing. So you'll find like sometimes your client will do that. You'll be like, oh no, take that back. Try this. And then that's okay. That's the thing you'll say. I do say the more you do this job, the better you get at saying, like, you'll learn some magic phrases. Again, like that's where the whole just circling back. I feel like I've talked about this a lot lately, just somehow, but circle back to the whole group exercise idea. Feet shoulder width apart, knees pointing, toes pointing straight forward. Now sit back like you're sitting onto a chair and don't let your knees go past your toes. Right? Like that was like such a classic group exercise phrase, right? And it worked for a lot of people for a long time until we kind of, more science came out about like the whole, pushing your knees away thing. But the point that I'm trying to make right now is like, let's go to this idea of exercise training technique. If this guy's feet is turning out during a bicep curl, probably doesn't matter so much, but it is like something I can make a mental note of and say like, oh yeah, that's those calves are turning his feet, or that hamstring muscle's turning those feet again. You can even see, by the way, if you actually look at the way his skin's kind of drawn here, you can see that biceps femoris short head's like coming, making kind of a big, contracted effort there. And there's your turning out. Now this version here, you look at this, and it's like he's also got feet turning out, but look at the angle of his femur. The knees are pointing away. So that's much better. Like in this version, it looks like he's letting him cave in a little bit. But when he had to like push his knees out so that his arm could drop down here during this is called a concentration curl, because it looks like he's looks like he's concentrating. Or at least it will when he brings the dumbbell up. He has to push his knees out. So now that's actually pretty good tracking. Going in the same direction there. And maybe this is an optical illusion. I mean, we are looking from the side here. He could be in better form than I think. But so that's okay. So kind of going into what the point that I'm trying to make is like, how do we contract the glute muscle? Well, you think about like what your glute muscles are responsible for, right? Your gluteus maximus, it's primarily responsible for hip extension, but it also does hip external rotation. So it takes your femur back behind you this way. There's your hip extension, right? But it also swings your femur externally, right? It opens it up. There's your hip external rotation. So if I'm seeing bad glute engagement, right? Let's say I've got Erin squatting and I'm like, she's letting her knees cave in. Her glutes aren't engaging the way I want to. For my exercise technique, what I might tell her is I might do something verbally that gets her to do something that activates the glutes. And I know the glutes do abduction and external rotation. So I might just say, hey, Erin, do me a favor. While you're squatting on this set, push your knees away for me. And I say that because that's going to get you to engage your glutes a little bit better, right? Or I might do something that's like, and maybe the verbal bit isn't working. This is good to your point as well, Trisha, or answering your question as well. Let's say it just happens a lot. I got a just super consistent client. They just keep letting their knees cave in. It just keeps happening, right? Feet turning out, knees are caving in. So what I might do is give them a squat variation that requires them to push their knees out. So I might go with something like this, like a banded squat around the knees, right? So I might go get like a hip band, right? I keep seeing my client do this. So I go get a hip band, and now two things are going to happen simultaneously. One, now they've got a resistance, making the whole knees caving in thing worse. But they also have like a physical cue that's telling them to push away against it. So they've got like almost like a reminder, right? It's like somebody poking them, in the place I want them to contract. So not only is that going to make them work harder to push their knees out, which could give their gluteus medius and gluteus maximus actually like more effort. So then that muscle can maybe catch up, right? Because now it has to contract more. But also it's a physical sensation that will get them to push their knees out. Why do I want them to push their knees out? Well, we go right back to our list, right? It's underactive. I want them to activate it. What does the gluteus maximus do? It pushes the knees out. So that's when we look at this exercise technique stuff, that's what we're talking about, guys. We're talking about like making sure that we understand how to get the correct muscles to fire. And it's the muscles that are underactive. Or it could be the muscles that are overactive is what we tell our client to stop doing. The other version of coaching is kind of flipping this around and saying like, hey, do you feel like you're squeezing your inner thighs at all? Do me a favor, stop squeezing those muscles. You know what I mean? Like, but I find personally that is, I think, way harder for people to notice. I'm not much of an, this is a fake term, by the way. A term that I use that is, I made up myself. I call that like anti-coaching, where it's the like don't do this style of coaching rather than the do this style of coaching. I find that I'm not particularly very good. I don't know if I'm just not as good at talking it or saying what I need to say, but I find that like anti-coaching is not, it really hasn't worked for me very well. You might find it super helpful. I imagine, Shantice, you've probably got the most experience. You can't talk right now, but I imagine you've probably got the most experience. I don't know about you. I find the don't do this is way less effective than do this.
It kind of sends a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And for some people, I think if they're being corrected all the time and you're saying don't,
Yeah.
It's too negative.
Yeah, and don't be wrong, I do say don't let your knees cave. You know, I will say stuff like that, but if I see my client doing that like super consistently, I definitely try. I find that like when I say don't do this, don't do it, it's just not, people don't pick up on it as much. You know what I mean? I have a guy.
Coming from someone who doesn't take verbal cues really well, I don't. If you just tell me how to do something, sometimes it takes me a moment to think
Sure.
it through. And so if I'm in a workout situation and I have a trainer that's saying don't,
Yeah.
it's making me feel worse.
Sure. And
yeah.
Here's the thing, if they are doing something you want them to stop doing, it is okay to be like, hey, here's what you are doing. What I would rather have is this. You know what I mean? Like that's still, that's still an effective way to like coach that stuff. So yeah, well, so we kind of come back to this again. We look at like our appropriate like implementation of like these exercises. Sometimes it may be that you need to regress an exercise, right? Let's say I've got my client squatting with the band around the knees because I'm trying to get better glute engagement, but it's kind of just, it's making a ton of like the knees caving in like crazy, right? Actually, like look at this one here. You can even see this is a demo on the internet. Meaning that like this is somebody trying to teach somebody else how to do something. But you look at this, she's doing banded, I call these banded step outs. She's in a squat, so I guess a squat's banded step out. But she's going from hip adduction, the knees caving in, and then she steps away into hip abduction. So this is clearly supposed to be like a gluteus medius, gluteus maximus exercise, right? But in her ending position, her knees are, I mean, that's caved in. Look at that. Like that kneecap is coming down. It's missing the foot entirely. A lot of people tend to aim for their big toe, which we also don't want. We want to aim for the middle of the foot, second and third toe. Even big toe is technically knee valgus. But she's not even hitting that. She's missing her foot entirely, right? That's caved in. Why? Probably because that band is either too tight or she's maybe just not strong enough in her glutes to drive that away. So this is where I might need to regress this exercise. What I'd probably do in a regression like this is I would just make the movement less complex. And so I'd probably just have her go up to a standing position and have her do like a banded lateral walk. It's one of my favorite exercises for glute activation. Not this version. Again, look at that. These are caving in. Actually, a lot of people really struggle when they do this in squats. So this is actually very easy to find not so great demos on the internet of. Yeah, now the toes are four. I'd actually put the foot, I don't know. But I would say this is not my favorite version. I don't like the super low one. What I prefer instead is the below the knees version. And then I don't have my clients go so wide. When you get super wide, it's almost impossible to knot. So I really like just around the feet or just around the ankles. And then it's hip width apart to slightly wider than hip width apart, back to hip width apart. And that way, they're always focused on abduction and tracking the knees over the toes, which is our main focus here, right? Rather than this kind of knee collapsed in thing, which might give you glute activation, but more than likely, it'll probably give you TFL activation. Here's a great one. This is fantastic. So straight over, and then like he's going really wide, but he's got this like good angle here. You can see the kneecap, right? Right over the toes there. Love that. And that's wide. He's still doing a good job. That guy's probably that guy's probably got a really wide pelvis. Or he's just put a lot of work into getting very good at it. I shouldn't minimize anyone's efforts, but so yeah, I like that. Or if that's still too hard, I'll do like just a straight up hip abduction. And do it by itself. Do one leg at a time. You know what I mean?
Just stand there and raise the leg, you mean?
Yeah, well, either a standing version or maybe even lay down and do like against gravity this way, right? That's always a really good one as well. So again, if you see your client doing something incorrectly, now let's say they're arching their back during a shoulder press, right? What does that kind of tell us? Two things. Might be that the erector spinae is really tight. So rather than stabilizing their core, they're contracting their low back, and their low back is taking over. Same way we would experience in the overhead squat, right? When we see a low back arch. But it also kind of tells us, think about, let's take a look. What muscle am I primarily using right now to do this shoulder press, guys? Take a look at me from the side. What muscle is primarily doing my shoulder press? Throw something out, somebody.
Can you demo again?
Yep. What's my prime mover during this movement right here?
Lats?
Is the delts?
Sorry.
Delts.
Yeah, it looks like that does look like a lat pull down. Sorry, I'm pantomiming dumbbells in hands, shoulder press going up this way.
Deltoids.
Yeah, delts.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, it does look like a lat pull down. Cool. So that's correct. That is totally my prime mover for, it's shoulder abduction, right? Shoulder abduction is primarily your deltoid. Now, trick question. What muscle am I primarily using during this movement? Pushing it away, by the way.
When you're at an incline?
So here's the thing. Yes, but also no. Yes, I am at an incline. No, I'm not supposed to be. So I'm here going like this, right?
Aren't you using more some chest in there now?
Absolutely. Yeah, you guys are both like locked in right where I want you. Yeah, I'm using my chest. But I told my client to do a shoulder press.
Okay, I get where you're going with this. Okay, I was a little thrown at first. I get where you're going. She's using bad form.
I have bad form. Yeah, I'm cheating, right? I'm arching my low back because maybe I have a weak core muscle. Now what that's causing me is to use the wrong muscles. And now my pectorals are doing most of my work the same way I would during a chest press. So yeah. So see, the point I'm kind of making here is like, okay, so now I've got two things happening simultaneously. I've got some weak muscles that are not firing correctly, and I've got some tight muscles or over-eager muscles that are firing more than they're supposed to. So I might have to tell my client, hey, you're arching your back a little bit. That's not what I want because that's going to cause you to target the wrong muscles. Also, it's dangerous. It's going to put more pressure on your low back. I probably wouldn't say it as harshly like that, but I'll say like, yeah, you're contracting the wrong core. Do me a favor. Now, I'm overusing this, right? So I need to increase engagement in this. Now, we've been talking about this. We talked about this on, it would be Tuesday last week when we were doing like hinging stuff. How can I increase core engagement, guys? What's a quick one sentence note I can give to increase core engagement? Anybody remember?
Brace.
Brace. Yeah. So I can say, hey, do me a favor, pull your belly button in towards your spine and brace. So I'll do the draw and maneuver, which will activate my transverse abdominis, as well as like internal obliques, right? All those stabilizer muscles, diaphragm, pelvic floor, right? And then I'll also say brace, and that'll activate rectus abdominis. Now, rectus abdominis is a spinal flexion. That's literally the opposite of our spinal extensor. So the draw and maneuver is important, but directly the opposite of like this muscle back here, bracing. Yeah. So I would say bracing is more important in this particular example, but in life, I would say like get the transverse abdominis. So I never say one without saying the other personally. But Lisa, your instinct of like get the rectus abdominis, which is opposite of the erector spinae, that's a really good instinct. If you can only get one, in this very specific example, I'd say do what you said. Me personally, I almost never say one without saying the other. I'll always be like, pull your belly button in and brace. Those kind of follow each other up. But I might do that, right? And now all of a sudden my client gets better core engagement. It gets them from arching back to neutral. But now maybe they've got this, they're so used to doing their shoulder presses in this bad arching style. Maybe now their shoulder press starts to look like this. Ooh, right? Now they've got torque, right? They've got rotational torque happening because they're pushing at an angle instead of up overhead. So there could be a lat tightness problem that's even preventing them from even getting into that position, right? They have a hard time abducting because their adductors are so tight, right? So that's where I might need to take a regression. I might need to go, all right, let's go do like a quick little lat stretch. And then the standing shoulder press where you're focused on your core and this stuff, maybe a little bit too tough. Let's take it into a seated shoulder press where you can have your back against like a pad there, and that's going to regress you in a way that like you can work on this thing that I'm trying to work on, which is strengthening the deltoid. So I am having, or maybe it's a stabilizer problem. You know, maybe dumbbells are a little too chaotic for this client. Maybe I regress by putting them on a barbell, you know. Although barbell for newbies, I will say this, just barbell is considered a regression in terms of stability. However, I will say just in terms of form things, barbells are sometimes intimidating. So if they're really new, while it is a progression, while it is a regression in your textbook, I think like intimidation factor can sometimes make it a progression, but it's more of a like psychological. And then sometimes people are afraid of hitting their chin. So, which you should not have a problem with on a military press, but you'll sometimes see people arch because of that. And we also don't want that. But it told me, right? It told me the same thing. The low back arching during my shoulder press, same problem as low back arching, you know, tight lumbar extensors, lats, and weak abdominals. That is the same thing as low back arching during a squat. Now, squat also probably has more to do with like, you know, glutes and hip flexors here, right? But that is where like when we're talking about good form, and we're talking about like how to progress or regress our clients, the movement is the movement, no matter what exercise it is that they're doing at the time. You know, arching is caused by the same, you know, the muscles that cause arching are pulling the skeleton the same way. You know, it's just whatever triggered that pulling, yeah, might be from one place or another. It might be a little bit different for the two clients, you know, or the two exercises. So we want to get kind of familiar with, we're just going to cover these big ones here and in the pushing and the pulling assessments because the shoulder elevation, right? So again, this is where you guys got to get used to thinking of those opposites, right? If I see that Lisa is excessively dropping her arms down, I need to say, okay, what muscle drops the arms down? That's the lats and maybe even a little bit of the pectorals here, right? So she's doing a lot of that. That tells me that those muscles are contracting too much. They're tight. So then I want to engage the opposite of those muscles, probably upper back muscles, right? Probably flip from one side of the joint straight to the other, right? In order to activate that. So maybe I coach my client to engage their upper back muscles a little bit better, right? And then that fixes that problem. I got my client excessively leaning forward here, right? The abdominals are squeezing too hard, right? I might say like, pull your belly button in towards your spine, squeeze your glutes, and try to keep your chest up, right? And then that pulls on all of this. Again, keeping your chest up is going to activate the erector spinae. Or there's a calf problem. If that's the case, you're probably going to need to regress by like elevating their heels or something. They might just not have the ankle dorsiflexion necessary. How's this feeling so far, guys? A little more free form in this domain. Works a little bit differently than just like going through PowerPoint slides. So I just want to check in because it's a bit of a different teaching style, different learning style. How are we feeling about?
I actually like this. This is
Yeah, me
actually
too.
very helpful.
Good.
Yes,
Okay, good.
me too. I think
Good.
it's just the more, real world examples instead of just
Yeah,
like
it's more
textbook.
helpful, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. So yeah, like again, it's coming from a place of it's that opposites, so much
You
of
know,
like what we
Can
do.
I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, please.
I just had to really think about what are the antagonists to the lats. Like, I don't know that I ever really thought about that in that way.
That's fair. So, what does your lat do? We'll put it up here. So latissimus dorsi.
Well, when it's pulling down, I mean, when it's activating, it's bringing you down. Brings you down. So everything up top, I would think, and around the shoulders would be the antagonists.
Yeah, so its actions are to concentrically accelerate. Now, that sentence is always the same. Whenever you're describing like what a muscle does, right? You always say concentrically because it's when the muscle's squeezing. And concentric means to accelerate. You're moving something. So concentrically accelerates. It is a shoulder. That's where it attaches. It's moving your shoulder joint. Extension. So that's this, right? Or more accurately, it would be from here, this, right? So shoulder extension. It is also really good at shoulder adduction. That's this. Right, if it were up here, I would pull down like this. And it also does shoulder internal rotation. So a bit of a surprising one sometimes when you think about your lats. But if you actually look at where it's running and how it attaches, what you don't really see in this picture here is like the way this kind of looks is that it like attaches here. And it does, but it also has, I'm just going to kind of modify their picture here. Ooh, too big. It actually has some attachment on the front there. So I drew it in a little hash mark. I wouldn't fill this in. But yeah, I try to draw it as like a dotted line. And that is indicating that it's actually on the front side of the front side of the humerus there, right? So when you think about it, right, it's going to run under. I had to wear a black shirt today, didn't I? It's going to run underneath my armpit like this, and then it's going to grab like where my fingers are grabbing here, which is the front side of my humerus, right? So my palm is facing forward right now, right? And then when it pulls, it would pull this way, and that's going to cause internal shoulder rotation. So your lat accelerates. Extension is its kind of main prime movement. Adduction is kind of its main prime movement, but it is also part of your shoulder internal rotator. And so it moves your humerus, it swings it in this way. So if you see your client rounding their shoulders, that could be tight lats. If you see your client have a hard time reaching up like this. And as soon as like this muscle's supposed to start stretching, and instead they start arching. Because look, now my arms are up overhead, right? Right? No. Right? It's an optical illusion. If you see that, that could be tight lats. And then the adduction, I don't know. You're not really going to spot excessive adduction unless you had a client walking around like this all day. Because, you know, your body's going to be in the way. But that is two things you can look for. If they arch their back when they are supposed to take their arms overhead. So your question though, Trisha, like what is the antagonist to the lats, right? Well, basically anything that's going to concentrically accelerate shoulder flexion, reading the word extension, shoulder flexion, which, you know, the antagonist of that would be going this way, right?
So your biceps.
A little, like but not in your textbook. It is true that your biceps actually do help a little bit here, but the prime mover would be your deltoid.
Your deltoids?
Right, particularly
what?
anterior deltoid.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So let's change this a little bit so you can see this. So we're gonna go concentrically accelerates. So I'm just gonna go like this. And then
I didn't mean to throw things off completely. Sorry.
No, this is good. This is what I was moving into anyways. So shoulder extension. Capitalize it just because we should now. Shoulder adduction. And shoulder internal rotation. Cool. So there's our muscles, right? So now all I did was just lay this out slightly differently. So there's your lat, right? And then we're going to go versus. Actually, let's not put that there. Let's put this up here. So what concentrically accelerates shoulder flexion? Well, I would say the anterior deltoid, which does shoulder flexion. Okay. So there to there, opposites, right? What about shoulder adduction? Well, that's probably going to be your medial deltoid.
So would that be that the anterior deltoid eccentrically decelerates upon
Sorry, go ahead. One more time.
So, okay, you have the lat is responsible for shoulder extension, and then the anterior deltoid is responsible for shoulder flexion. So, if you are concentrically accelerating during shoulder extension, you are eccentrically decelerating during shoulder flexion.
Yes. But I will say this is also like I am definitely going to write the word because I've got these listed opposite here and I'm listing this muscle. This is concentric. You know what I mean?
No. If you are not doing not press, what were you doing? What was the motion?
Lat pull down.
Lat pull down.
Right.
So that would okay.
Yeah, if I were doing, let's say my goal is to do, you know, a front raise, right? Then I would be doing shoulder flexion. That's concentric. If I'm doing a front raise and I keep arching my back, right? And it's like, ooh, your lat clearly doesn't want you even to get to here. Nobody's that inflexible, I will say. Like nobody can't at least go to here while still being in good form. It's mostly getting to here is the part where you'll start to see the archers. If you see somebody who is just doing this and they're arching, that's probably more of a core problem than anything. I cannot imagine somebody with that tight of lat muscles. That would be crazy. But yes, that's like, this is the concentric versus, right? But yeah, I would say eccentrically decelerate, and I would just flip all these around. Same thing over here. But we think about like, what is the direct antagonist to the lats? You know, there's an argument to be made that like, well, doesn't the top part of your pec do a little bit of shoulder flexion? Yeah, a little, you know, but like this is directly the antagonist muscle there. What about shoulder internal rotation? a little bit tough because there's actually a lot of muscles here. But we can just say rotator cuff, right? And there's your shoulder external rotation, right? And the rotator cuff is that group of muscles, right? It's not the whole group, but like otherwise I'd have to write a really big list here. But it's your teres minor is a big one, right? Working directly opposite of that. It's probably the big one. But then like there's you've got your super and infraspinatus are doing a little bit of that as well. But like I'd say teres minor is like really the big kind of opposite, part of the rotator cuff working opposite the lats. So it is funny though, like why can't a group of muscles in the rotator cuff keep up against that lat? Well, mostly just because look how big it is. Like, those poor little guys that live right here got to work against this giant muscle. So yeah, so now it's like, okay, that's what you're seeing, right? So again, this is that learning how to work in opposites part of our job, right? I see my client doing too much of this, and I know that muscle fires when it does this, and this, right? I want my client to do the opposite of that. So I want my client to do the opposite of this, and this. Does that make sense? And then Trisha, did that clear up your lat question?
Yes.
Think so,
Cool.
maybe. Or left me with more questions. I'm not quite sure, but
Did it? What does that mean? What do you what?
no, I need to just work it out in my head.
Okay. So this is where, literally, guys, what I would do maybe we'll do this tomorrow. I haven't brought this activity out. I haven't done activities because we just do gym time and stuff. But maybe we'll do this tomorrow. I used to play catchphrase in class, and like the rules of catchphrase, you are not allowed to say any of the words that are in your like word, right? So one of the best strategies, just for as somebody who plays a lot of board games, that you guys can implement the next time you're at a party and they're playing fishbowl or celebrity or catchphrase or whatever you want to call it. Think of the opposites, right? If I wanted you to guess the character Harry Potter, the opposite that I would say is like, oh, okay, I wouldn't say this is the guy who fights Harry Potter. I can't say that, right? But I would say Voldemort is the opposite of, and maybe you'll say Dumbledore, but like eventually you're going to get to Harry, right? Like it's a real, like you want to train your brain to be able to do that whole, like draw your connections between like opposites. This is also why, like, think about your test, just talking about test prep, because that's the course we're in right now.
Oh, 100%, which is why I asked you what it was, because I do really work on like automatically knowing the opposite.
Yeah,
And
it's
suddenly I just kind of like, oh, I never thought about what is the opposite of that.
Yeah. No, it is a super, super helpful way to think, because your clients are going to do too much of one thing. And so you want them to do the opposite so you can get them drawn back to neutral. Knees are caving in? Great. What muscles cave the knees out? Gluteus maximus, right? Low back is arching. Okay, what muscles cause the low back arching? Hip flexors or rectus spinae. What's the opposite of arching? Rounding. Glutes, hamstrings, abdominals. Right? So that's a little bit of like how to get your form fix there. The big thing I wanted to kind of cover when talking about like the blueprints and stuff is just I wanted to cover the opposite thing, but also like don't forget, guys, we talk a lot about like seeing these things during these assessments. You're also going to see them during other movements. You know what I mean? People don't just arch their back during the overhead squat. People arch their back when rowing. People arch their back when, doing the bicep curl machine or the tricep extension machine, which have nothing to do with your low back. But you'll still see it. And so like, knowing how to fix it is going to be key there. So that's a little bit, and then just talking about like kinesthetic, auditory, or visual cueing techniques, right? I'm not much of a toucher. I will say, like, in some ways that has helped me get better at using my words, when I'm trying to describe things. I do feel like I have had to be creative with how I tell someone how to do something. But there's nothing wrong with touching. I still do a little bit. I'll use like I usually use like 2 fingers. The big touch that I'm like really like common with is I do like it almost looks like I'm like one of those airplane guys. like, like whatever they're doing with those little light sticks. And I'll be like, hey, don't forget, like pull your shoulders back. So I'll come up and I'll give him just like a little tap between the shoulder blades and I'll go, whoop, right? I'll do that sometimes. Or I'll go to like the kneecaps and I'll give them like a little like touch. And I was like, push those knees out. I'll like a little tap on the knees and I'll go like this. And then they'll push their knees out. So you can use like kinesthetic cues. It's helpful. Draws your client's attention. I mean, there's nothing more abrasive than just, being touched somewhere, it will draw your attention immediately. Auditory cues also very helpful with just saying like, hey, do this, right? Like that coaching using your words. That's my favorite. But then also like visual cueing, right? So you're doing this. I want you to just tighten that up. Let's do this, right? Giving your client that like visual technique, modeling, very, 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 very helpful. Lisa, at the very, your second mod with me, so it was long ago, but like we have a day talking in our exercise psychology class about modeling, and how like effective that technique can be. But like modeling, guys, when you're modeling how to do an exercise for your client, you kind of want to consider it in a couple different ways. So what you'll do is you'll have your client, the way it breaks down in the textbook is it says, execute the play, right? And the play could be an actual play, like running around and catching a ball or something, but it could also just be, do a push-up, right? So you'll tell them to execute the play. And then you'll say you're going to judge the movement. So you're going to judge whether or not they did it correctly. So maybe they're sagging their hips a little bit, right? So they're arching, right? Again, what does that tell you? Bad core engagement, right? If somebody's sagging during a push-up, right? It could be that the exercise is hard. Yes. It could be that their chest is fatigued. Absolutely. That could totally be true, but more likely it is their core is not engaging correctly. So they're not stabilizing their spine. They're arching their spine, so we're trying to engage. So we judge the movement. We notice their hips are sagging. We notice the excessive erector spinae work, the lack of core strength, right? And so we then tell them the new play. So say, hey, do me a favor, pull your belly button in towards your spine. Let's bring your hips up in the air a little bit more, right? And really engage that core, right? So we tell them to do something like that. Now, maybe they get it, maybe they don't. But what we can do then is we can follow up the modeling with showing, this is what you're doing. So you can like arch and like show them the push-ups as they were doing. This is what I want you to do. So you tighten the core up a little bit, and then come down and move as a whole. I find it's really helpful, actually. Push-ups are a really good like practicing coaching exercise. Because what you'll see, let's see if I can find footage of this. This is going to be really tough.
Stop tilting your forearm.
Oh, hold on. I show this. This one I can show.
Hey y'all, this is Rick. I'm with Annie, NASM, and I've been watching Annie's overhead squat, and she's got her feet turning out like this, all right? So as her feet turn out, we're gonna go through a corrective exercise series with Annie to try to remedy that. So the first thing we're gonna look at is we have to release some muscles. So the muscles we're gonna release are going to be the calves, all right? So gastrocnemius, the soleus. Then we're gonna go through some lengthening techniques for that. So we're gonna stretch them. and then we're going to activate the underactive muscles. We're looking at the anterior and the posterior tibialis. I'm going to show you where those are and how to do them. And then we're going to get into some more of an integrated stabilization technique so that we get her functioning in normal movement patterns, not just an isolated movement pattern. So Annie, let's get started. So we're just going to show you what to do on the right side. Now, this is going to be the highlight version. So Annie's going to do is she's going to release these calves, keep the foot completely relaxed, and she's going to do a search and destroy. So she's going to roll through, try to find out where those tense spots are. Now what she's done is she's taken the other leg, added it on top, put some weight on it, put a little bit of pressure on it. Now she's lifted up her backside. She's going to put a little more pressure on it, but make sure these muscles stay relaxed in the feet. All right. Now, once Annie finds that spot, I'm going to have her just rest her backside down, and then she can take that top leg and put some additional pressure on it, so that way she's not holding herself up the entire time. Some of your clients, like Annie, will be able to do it. Some of the clients not going to be able to do it. It might hurt people's wrists, so just have a seat when you do this. That's what I do. So now she's gone through the release, the iliopsoas, the gastrocnemius release. Normally, you'd look for at least 2 spots released for 30 seconds. Let's assume that we've done that. Hop up and let's get some stretching in. So we're going to do a stretch specifically for the calves here. So Annie's going to go into that stretch. Now realize that her feet turn out. So when she stretches, that foot's going to have to be straight ahead, maybe even slightly internally rotated.
So again, see what he's doing there? Like, he's saying, like, she's naturally turning her feet out. So as her coach, we're either going to at least correct her to neutral or maybe even overcorrect her. The overcorrection works well in stretching, not so much in strength training, but again, working in that opposites.
To that stretch. Now realize that her feet turn out. So when she stretches, that foot's going to have to be straight ahead, maybe even slightly internally rotated, because if it's short this way, then we're going to lengthen it more by straightening it up. So let's keep it in a neutral position. And what Annie can do here is that normally should be up against a wall or should be on a slant board, so we're just giving you the visual. What I want you to do, go ahead and press into me if you need to, lean forward. She's going to drive the heel into the ground. You're going to lock out your knee, and then, strangely, but this works, she's going to squeeze her glute. So get that butt cheek squeezed, glutes tight, quads tight, heel drives down. And it's interesting, the glute squeeze it actually helps her to supinate, which gets her out of pronation. So we're going to go through this, and it's just a perfect example of how connected the body is, right? So glutes tight, quads tight, heel driven down. She's released that muscle for 30 seconds. Let's go into some activations. So the activation, she's going to stay on that same foot. And I'm going to have Annie now go into, let's do an isolated activation, and then we'll do an integrated activation. So go ahead and let's drop you down, put your foot on the roller, and she's going to do an activation for her anterior tibialis. So the tibia is this bone right here. Anterior tibialis is this muscle. You can see it on this leg. So that muscle activates by going into dorsiflexion and inversion. So this is eversion, this is inversion. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to resist that. So I'm going to resist dorsiflexion, which is the foot going up, and inversion. So I'm pulling at this angle. I'm also holding her ankle because I don't want to pull this direction.
You guys see the green band on a green screen? She's got an invisible foot.
And make her hip work. So I'm just going to stabilize it. Go ahead and slowly come down and then back up. Good. So that is your anterior tib activation. Your posterior tib activation is plantar flexion with inversion. So she's going this direction. So again, I'm going to hold her foot and I'm pulling against the inversion. So go ahead and slowly undo it and go ahead and plantar flex and invert. Good. Go one more time, invert, more, squeeze it. Now hold it there, don't let me move you. And slowly come with me, so she's getting the eccentric activation here. And relax. So now that we've done some isolated activation, let's do some integrated stuff. So hop up, have her do some balance exercises. So you're going to stand on that same leg you just did activations with, and she's going to go into, let's say instead of a multiplanar reach, instead of doing 1, 2, 3, let's just have your hands on the hips and make circles. All right? Now, as she's doing this, and you as a coach or a trainer are going to be watching her to make sure the hips are completely level. So if you see the hips moving this way and she's starting to shift, you're going to move that hip out to the side, make sure she's neutral. So if she's working at retail and she's typing some stuff up for you, you have no idea that the person behind the desk is doing some weird activations for her feet that turn out, right? So she's doing this, she's looking great. Now let's do an integrated exercise that integrates the upper body with the lower body. We're going to do a reverse lunge, and she's going to do the opposing arm, right? So if she stands on her right leg, it's her left hand that's going to be in the resistance, and you're standing on your right leg. Yeah, so let's go ahead and switch it. Reverse lunge, and instead of a press, she's going to do a row. So go ahead and reach back and stand up. Row, nice. So she's going to lock out that quad, squeeze that glute right there. Go ahead and reach back again and pull up. Now again, this is going to be a more difficult exercise doing a unilateral than if she did both at the same time, because it's easier to balance from her leg if she's using both of her hands. But I take this one away and she's doing the opposite side. She's got some crisscross activation in her body that she's got to stabilize down at her foot. All right, so it's her foot that's stabilizing this whole movement pattern here. All right, guys, that's it. Again, the highlighted version of a lower extremity postural dysfunction fix. So hope you enjoyed it, hope it helped. If you have questions, let us know. It's Annie, I'm Rick with NASM.
Okay, so we observe our client feet turning out, like knees caving in during our overhead squat, right? We know that they are particularly good at the gastrocnemius, so we're going to loosen that up. That biceps femoris short head is also going to be a problem, although didn't get quite as much attention in that video. We want some good anterior and posterior shin muscle stabilization, activation there. And we need that good gluteus medius activation. So you can hear some good tips that he had in there, right? Telling her to squeeze her glutes, right? That's going to really help engage that in the hopes that, like, by, squeezing these external rotation muscles, right, your gluteus maximus, which turns the foot out, right, that's going to keep her in that correct alignment that we are looking for there. What's that? Does that make sense, everybody? Questions? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So let's take a look at another one. We've got traveling up. We've got the low back arch here. Actually, there's the playlist. Let me find that playlist. It's going to make me navigating this a little bit easier. Feet turn out. That's an arch forward. I don't want that one yet. Yeah. And is it low back arch? Yeah. That's the one I want, right? Rick and Annie. Yeah. All right. And again, we're looking at this, we got squat videos here, but low back arches could be a chest press, could be a shoulder press, could be a row, right? Because we're looking for that excessive low back arch. How do we fix it?
Hey y'all, we're back. Rick and Annie. And Annie, this time I found that she's got another postural distortion. She's going through lumbopelvic hip postural distortion. So in an overhead squat, I may have seen her back arch a little bit. So with the back arching, now I'm looking at it saying, okay, there's a series of things that I've got to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to have you go through some rolling techniques for your TFL. So the TFL, if you make your body the shape of a box, it's right there in that front corner, like that front pocket. So I'm going to have you go and roll your TFL. And what she's going to do, she's going to go right to the hip. So here's the bony point in the front of your hips called the ASIS, okay? So you're going to go that bony point, and then right here is called the greater trochanter of the femur. That muscle is right in between these two bony points. Don't roll on bony points. Don't want to release those. Trying to release that muscle in between. Again, the TFL. So she's going to get that muscle released, and it's a really overactive muscle in a lot of folks. It likes to jump in there and take over because it has so many joint actions that it can do. The other thing that because she's in a hip flexed position, I'm looking at her saying, well, obviously I need to get her hip flexors released, but the major hip flexors in the body are the iliacus and the psoas major, and you cannot get through them through instrument-assisted tools because they're underneath the abdomen, and those are your major hip flexors. So we're going to get the muscles that we can get with the instruments we have. So Annie, what I'm going to have you do is now just roll. You're off the TFL, but onto the rectus femoris. Now, the rectus femoris is the major muscle that's in the quad. All right, but it's the only one that crosses the hip, and it is a hip flexor. So now she's going to roll over the quad. Gentlemen, be careful with this one. You're going to roll forward onto the quad. Nice, slow and control. You're going to find that first point of tension where you're like, that kind of hurts, and I don't want to be there. That's where I want you to be. So stay on that spot. Annie, you find a spot of contention. Excellent. Hold that position. And we're going to usually find about 2 places that you'll release. Hold for a minimum of 30 seconds, but we're going to expedite this a little bit. So Annie's now released her TFL. She's released her rectus femoris. So now we're going to move on into, after we've isolated this and we've released it with pressure, now we're going to lengthen it. So Annie, let me have you go into a stretching exercise. So we're now actually going to stretch her iliacus and her psoas. So she's going to go into a kneeling hip flexor stretch, and from the front with her, and I'm going to show you from the side what's going on. All she's doing is she's going to stand upright, and she's going to go into what's called a posterior tilt, tuck. Right? So if she's already in an anterior tilt, then part of the stretching is to do the opposite of that. What you can even do is have the client squeeze the glute a little bit, get some active stretch there. You feel a stretch right here on the front of the hip. And then you see people doing these stretches where they take the arm up, they lean to the side, and they rotate. You can do that, and that's fine if you can do that. But right now, we're just going to keep it pretty simple, and we're going to go into this stretch just in the sagittal plane. We're not going to add the frontal plane or the transverse plane. So let's assume that we've gotten a good release from Annie here. So Annie's gotten the release. Let's go into some activations. So what muscles do I need to activate if I've got a client whose back arches, and I see the back arch in an overhead squat assessment? So I'm going to go, first of all, glute activation. Secondly, core activation. So Annie, come on down. I'm going to have her go into some bridges. And bridge is a great exercise for 2 reasons. The bridge is going to be great for hip extension, get the glutes to fire. But secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to get an active stretch for the hip flexors. So we're activating the opposing muscle, and the muscle that's giving us issues is getting some more stretch to it. So Annie, belly button in. She's going to go in a neutral position. You guys can cue like this. I want you to arch your back, so stick your butt out, tuck all the way underneath, and go right to the middle. Stay right there. Do not move from that position. Belly button in. Go ahead and squeeze your glutes before you lift and drive up. So I'm going to get her to squeeze like she's coming up from the hips. Be careful that they're not arching their back, because some clients will try to show you, look, I'm giving you what you want by coming up higher. That's not what I want. All right, so neutral position. And then when she lowers down, I want her just to lower from that hinge in the hip. All right, so it's only hip. Go ahead and lift back up. She's going to squeeze the glutes tight. She might even get a little stretch on the front of the hips. Now, some people do this. They roll the spine down. Annie, can you show us rolling down, like you drop from here and then you just kind of roll down? That is not a wrong exercise. But again, we're looking for spinal stabilization. And if the spine's moving, it's not stabilizing. So come back up. I want her to be strong in hip extension without the core movement. So think about, we're prepping her to do squats. I don't want to practice spinal rolling up and down. I only want hip movement with strong core. So go ahead and drop from the hips again. And then one more time, squeeze in the backside, drive up, and hold it right there. Do you feel a little bit of stretch on the front of the hips? That's absolutely cool. And one of the things you're going to get, you should ask your clients, do you feel it in your glutes? And you need to make sure that your clients know what muscle their glutes are, right? So, Annie, touch where you feel this on you. Glutes, right? So if she feels it here in her hamstrings, I'm going to have her move.
Kind of classic problem is like talking about like just communicating with your clients. You know, you'll say one muscle or something. They don't necessarily always speak our language. So just make sure, like, if you need to visually, verbally have them, you know, point to where they feel it the most. And sometimes people like feeling things. Don't forget, guys, like that can also be misinterpreted. They could feel a stretch. That's not the same as like the muscle being concentrically squeezed or anything. But again, you're going to dial that in the more you talk to your client and get better at, you know, communicating with them.
In her hamstrings, I'm going to have her move her feet towards her butt a little bit more. Once she does that, she can probably drive from the hips more, and it'll take out that hamstring overactivation. I don't mind if you feel it in your hamstrings. What I do mind is that you feel it in your hamstrings more than you feel it in your backside. That's called synergistic dominance. We got to cut that out. All right, so Annie, go ahead and lower back down. Perfect. So we've done posterior activation. Let's have you flip over. We're going to do a few planks. So she's going to go into a plank position. And in this plank, we're only going to do 3 just to show you what we're doing. Feet are hip width apart. Belly button's going to be drawn in. And Annie, I want you to lift up. I want you to squeeze your glutes tight. I want you to lock out your quads. And let's make it harder. I want you to drive your toes down into the floor. Suck in your belly button. And drop down to the knees. Relax. So we're going to do 2 more of those. Go ahead and lift back up. Everything together. Nice and strong. Abs, glutes, quads, calves. Everything's fired. Plank is in reference to a plank of wood, not the soggy spaghetti noodle planks that I'm seeing people do. We're trying to be locked out and strong. So Annie, drop down. Do 1 more super strong. Abs, glutes, quads, calves. Super tight. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Nice. Go ahead and drop down. And let's get an integrated exercise in. So Annie is now going to practice in this integrated exercise activation of the glutes and activation at the core at the same time. So go ahead and take this handle, step forward. I'm going to have Annie do a reverse lunge to balance. So she's going to really work on squeezing the glutes. And then she's going to do a chest press. As she does a chest press, she's got to stabilize her core. So now we got her backside and her front side working concurrently. So Annie, go ahead, reverse lunge, that's it, and drive forward, squeeze this glute and press forward for her abdominal activation. Go ahead, reverse lunge. I'm going to be out of the way this time. Squeezing from the backside, driving forward so this backside is firing. Abs are firing super tight. 1 more time, last one. Go ahead and drive up, squeezing the glutes, keeping the abs tight. Perfect. You see she put her foot down? I'd much rather people put their foot down than hop around like a maniac. So put your foot down, get your balance again, and stabilize. It looks really good. Go ahead and let's take a break. Guys, this is a nice little exercise. Lumbopelvic hip dysfunction. If in an overhead squat you see somebody's back arch, we're going to release muscles like the TFL, the rectus femoris. We're going to stretch out the psoas. We're going to activate the glutes. We're going to activate the front of the body, so the abdominals, like the transverse abdominis, stabilize from the front. And then we're going to do an integrated exercise like a squat to press or a lunge to press, where she's activating both the glute and the abs in one exercise. So thanks so much for watching. You guys have questions, let us know. I'm Rick. This is Annie. Glad you watched.
Okay, so again, we're kind of just covering some broad strokes here, right? But again, we saw she's arching, so squeezing those glutes, right? That makes a lot of sense in this type of like lower body exercise where you're trying to get increased glute activation. It could be hip flexors that are causing the arching. If it's more the abdominals, great. If they have like bad core stabilization, the erector spinae is doing too much, squeeze those abdominals, pull you back to neutral. Again, doing the opposites, mastering our opposites. One more. We'll do arms fall forward, and then there we go. We'll get wrapping up here. So, oop, oop, oop.
Hey y'all, it's Rick and Annie. We're going to be going through an upper extremity corrective exercise series, and we're probably just going to do it on one side to keep it short. So just to give you a heads up on what we're going to do. Annie, we've decided, has upper extremity postural distortion. So in an overhead squat, her arms fall forward. So we're going to do a release technique. So we're going to inhibit her lats and her pecs. We're then going to have her lengthen it. Then we're going to do an activation technique, and then we're going to do an integrated exercise to help strengthen and bring everything together. So, Annie, you ready?
Yes.
All right, come on down. Let's get that foam roller. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to have Annie go right basically into her armpit, but on the back side of it. So Annie's going to be rolling, not quite even her lats yet, but she's getting in that area with the tight muscles in the posterior side of the shoulder. And then as she rolls farther up, so the roller's coming down on her, there's a place called the scapula, right? So, or the shoulder blade. That inferior angle, that very last portion, the lats connect there, and you'll see when she hits it, because she's going to make a face. All right, so when Annie feels that little portion right there, it gets to be pretty tight, and that's where a lats connection. It's a nice place to release from. So Annie, you got that spot? Now remember, we're going to do a couple of releases. We'll hold minimum of 30 seconds to let that autogenic inhibition take place, let the muscle mechanoreceptors relax themselves. And then we're going to go right into the next exercise. So Annie, let's go right into the next release. So what she's going to do, I'm going to have her roll back down a little bit. And just because I want to make sure that she's not rolling anything but muscle here, slowly now roll forward so it's right here, just at the bend of the armpit. And she's going to do a release right there of the pec major, and the pec minor also happens to be in that area. Now, this is a heads up for you. If your client, you need to ask, don't just assume that they don't feel something. Ask your client, do you feel any numbness or tingling? If they do, that's called not good. So make sure that they don't have any tingling, any numbness, because they're on a nerve or blood supply or both. So hop off of that spot, find another spot, make sure it's only muscle. Annie, you getting a nice little release there? Fantastic. So those are our two inhibitory techniques. I'm going to have you flip right over so you're face down into a child's pose. And the child's pose is what we're going to use to lengthen those lats out, and it'll actually lengthen the pecs out as well. Now, there's multiple ways to do it, but this is the way we're going to do it. And what I've done, I have her go into this position because she stretches the lats by having a posterior tilt here. She's reaching the arm forward, and I'm going to help her just a little bit. I'm going to brace her a little bit here, and then I'm just going to roll that forward, but I'm locking her hand on there so her arm reaches forward. That way she's getting some scapular elevation, getting additional stretch in the lat here on this side. Do you feel that stretch in there, Annie? So if I wanted to get a little more of a stretch, then I could actually have her shift her backside that way. So she create like a crescent moon here. So she's lengthening the lat this direction. All right, so let's go ahead and have you come up. Let's go ahead and start some activation exercises. So come on up this way. And the activation exercise I'm going to have you do is I'll actually have you squat down a little bit, and you're going to go into your YTAs, or this is what NASM calls their combo number 1, right? So she's going to go up into a Y position, so Y, and this is a nice activation for those lower traps right here. Go ahead into your T position. Nice T position. Again, retraction, but now we have some horizontal abduction, so we're strengthening posterior delt. And then come back into your YTA position. And she's got a nice little external rotation here. She's squeezing her traps. She's retracting her shoulder blades. And you may even get folks that are really firing up in their triceps. And we're not going for this tricep activation. So if that's the case, just have them come out a little wider and squeeze back more. Good. Go ahead and do another one. Y position. This exercise is called scaption. So she's doing a scaption here. Go ahead into your T. This is a reverse fly. And then let's go ahead into your A position. And if you guys are familiar with our work, this is what we do. We call a floor cobra, except we're standing now. So this is a standing bent over cobra. Let's go into our combo number 2, Annie. So what she's going to do now is she's going to go into a row. So this is a high row, not an upright row. It's a high row. She's getting her posterior delt really active here and doing her retraction. Now she's going to rotate. She's going to do a shoulder press. Now it's really firing up these stabilizers in the scapula. Let's do a lat pull down. Good. Rotate in and dive into the pool. Let's get one more. Go ahead and pull it back. rotate up, overhead press, lat pull down, rotate down, and dive into the pool. Very nice. Stand up, face towards me. Now we're going to go into our integrated exercise. So I'm going to have Annie do a squat to a high row. And again, a high row is this position, not here, because I don't want those lats continually pulling her into this kind of protracted position. So she's going to go up, bring the elbows up high, keep that upper trap area, the posterior delts quite active. And I'm going to give her a pull from this angle. So Annie's going to go ahead and squat. She's going to drive forward, squeeze the glutes, and then, yeah, there you are. Good. I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher. It was almost turning into an upright row. So go ahead, and that's much, much better. And you'll notice there should be a straight line between where her elbows are and the line of this. So if I come down too low, she's going into an upright row, and that's not a great position for the shoulder to be in. So we're just doing high rows. Let's give me a few more. Squeezing those glutes. Hold it up at the top. And 3. Good. Abs, glutes tight. Good. Nice retraction. And one more time. Hold it. Hold it. Relax. Very nice. Cool. Thank you, Annie. And this is a nice little corrective exercise series. You guys go back through and make sure you look at this is the highlighted version of it. So make sure you go back through. You make sure you get both sides if both sides are affected, and then put this stuff to use. All right. Thanks again.
Okay. So arms are falling forward. Again, we can see we're putting the emphasis on the posterior deltoid, which is going to help in horizontal abduction, and then a lot of mid and lower trap activation. So we pull those shoulder blades down and back into the position we want them in. So, when it comes to a lot of this like coaching stuff, right? This whole chapter is basically like practicing, training your brain to do the opposites. So in terms of questions that they'll ask you from like this 5th domain, a lot of it is just the same program design stuff. You can see here, flexibility, core, balance, reactive, making sure that you understand if you have a client doing one thing, working towards one thing, right? So let's say they want to improve their stabilization, improve their muscular development. You need to make sure that you're picking exercises from the correct 5 phases, which we went over last time, and then picking like the right numbers. But then when it comes to actual individualized like form in different exercises and stuff, we do kind of practice this whole, correct muscle engagement thing, which really comes back to your assessments chapter. So this is its own domain in the in the exam blueprint, but really it's more of a review of the other stuff. So again, the only thing I kind of wanted to like look at again today, aside from what we've already looked at, is just remembering, go back to this concept of like, if your client is in one phase or the other, make sure you're picking the right exercises, and review that, right? So again, if your client is in the stabilization level, I want you guys to think of that as grabbing a stabilization tool bag, right? So your tool bag has, for their flexibility stuff, the only things you're going to pick: corrective flexibility, SMR, static stretches. The only numbers you're going to pick anywhere from here to here. For your core stabilization exercise that don't move the core too much. Now, what if you have to regress? Right? Oh, hold on a second. Chat bubble. The chart. Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. 1 second. I can't send it when I have it open. So I gotta send it here. And then rather than it puts me on, hold on. Let's put this on everyone. And there we go. Is the right file? Yeah. So there's our big chart. Boop. Just so you guys can get another download copy of that. Yes, very important to make sure that we are on like the right numbers. They're picking the right exercises. Don't move the core. Don't move the balance leg. Don't move when you land on your jumping exercise. Just hold your landings, right? limit your horizontal agility and limit unpredictability. So mostly focused on speed drills here. And then in terms of your resistance stuff, you're picking unstable variations of exercises. Now, again, tying that to what I wanted to, mostly talk about today, right? If you're trying to go for like a client who has a low back arch, you want increased core activation, pick an exercise where core activation's easy. If I've got my client doing, stability ball back extensions, right? This is a fine exercise and all, if you can do it properly. Keep that muted. It's a fine exercise, but like if your client can't balance on it and they can't, and like, look, it's actually causing arching here, right? She should be going just to neutral, but it's tough because like that's a pretty low range of movement from here just to there. That would be good, but no, she goes over here. So it's like, do I hate stability ball back extensions? No, I think they can be an effective tool for the right client. If I see that this is like a problem, this is probably the type of exercise I'm going to avoid with that particular client, right? If I see that my client's got an asymmetric weight shift, we were talking a little bit about like the chest not keeping up during the bench press earlier. You guys might know sometimes we sit into one hip a little bit. Trisha, same thing. Where we see a little bit of this, if you get this asymmetric shift stuff, right? I'm probably not going to pick exercises that emphasize shifting on one side. I'll probably pick the type of exercises that are focused on fixing asymmetric shifts. So unilateral, single-sided exercises. And where am I going to start? Always start with your bad leg. And that way, like, let's say you do, like, just addressing something that's totally unrelated to just like posture and form. Let's say you just have one strong arm, okay? Like, you don't want to just like, let's say I can, my right arm is stronger than my left. A lot of people will make the mistake. Is a different topic. I'm kind of ADDing here. But a lot of people will do extra reps on their weak arm to try to like, catch up and fill the gap. And it's like, the problem is you have strength in the right arm, and now you're training with extra reps. You're training for endurance in the left arm. So you're training in like a totally different style, right? So it makes way more sense to do your weak arm just first with a single-sided exercise. Do as many reps as you can correctly with good form, right? Or as heavy as you can. And then just match it on the other side. Now, does that mean that your right arm's not training as hard as your left? Yeah, probably. Does that mean that it's going to experience no progress at all? No. You may not be pushing I know that I say all the time you need to push yourself hard enough to actually experience growth, right? That is true, but that's ideally true. That's the way to get the best growth. You're still probably going to increase your strength in your other side. If I get 10 reps here and I'm working in a 10 to 12 rep window and I can't get to 12 on my weak arm and I can get to 12 on my right, I shouldn't. Just match what you did with your weak arm on your strong. That's going to give your weak arm time to catch up. Then you can get back into a bilateral exercise. You can do two, both arms at the same time. So we're kind of coming to the end of what we wanted to get through today, but I do want to just take a sec. How are you guys feeling? Questions, comments, concerns? Where we is? Guys, how are we feeling? Anything in particular? I know we didn't do I didn't pick a lot of pull exercises today because we're going to do pull tomorrow in person. So if that does,
No, I liked today, and I'm
Good.
anxious to just kind of look at it again after we're done with class.
love that. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to say this. This was a short video. Short videos mean my upload goes up a little faster. Lisa, I think you tripped your camera. which is fine. I just want you to be aware. Yeah, no. So yeah, a little bit of a shorter class today, so this will go up a little quicker. Yeah, take a review today, guys. And then one last little thing is I want to kill the recording here, and then I want to show you guys one last little resource that somebody texted me over the weekend that they found this. They're not a trainer. They're one of my clients, but so actually here, we'll wrap up the video.